I have come to this great land to seek my very own son. The sun is a wondrous body, like a magnificent father. If only I could be so grossly incandescent. I will stay behind to gaze at the sun.
Dark Souls is a notoriously obtuse game. We learn the basics of combat through little more than trial and error. At times, progress feels as difficult as finding the entrance to a secret level in most games. There's a few exceptions though, moments when direct information occludes the screen. There's an event like this near the beginning of the game that no one can miss. It's possible to beat the game without ever kindling a bonfire. It's not even especially difficult. Why then are we given explicit information about this mechanic? By directly encouraging us to kindle bonfires, the game introduces us to humanity.
This black sprite is called humanity, but little is known about its true nature. If the soul is the source of all life, then what distinguishes the humanity we hold within ourselves?
Dark Souls denies that we can know human nature. In the fragmentary, incomplete way it tells its story, it asks us to think differently about what it means to be human and what it means to know the truth. Throughout history, ideas about truth and humanity have been closely related. Plato, whose writings are regarded as the basis of all Western philosophy, characterized these two concepts by an allegory about a fire burning inside a cave. The shadows cast by this fire represent everything available to our senses, which Plato considered to be mere appearance. Everything tangible is temporary, but Plato believed that truth has to be always true and never changing. If we're only aware of the fire, we're in an ignorant state that Plato visualized as imprisonment. If freed, we can struggle to make our way out of the cave to a landscape above illuminated by the sun. This symbolizes a higher world of eternal truth that Plato believed exists literally. Everything in the world of the senses is an inferior copy of an object in this eternal realm. He believed that the eternal form of the good was the source of all truth and symbolized it as the sun.
Why not join me as a warrior of the sun? Righteous knights, guardians of all that is good, in the name of the Lord of Sunlight.
Plato claimed that humans alone can know eternal truth, truth that holds in any possible context, for example, the abstract rules of geometry. To explain why this is possible, Plato proposed that humans possess a distinctive dual nature. We have a temporary body like all other animals, but we also have an eternal soul. The soul existed before the body and will continue to exist after the body dies. When a person formulates abstractions, their soul is remembering the eternal world, which it experienced before they were born. According to the philosopher Richard Rorty, Plato's view continued to influence how Europeans thought about truth and humanity into modernity. For the sake of clarity, when I use the words modernity and modern in this video, I'm not talking about electric cars and smartphones, but rather a specific worldview formulated in Western Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. Rorty described how modern Europeans preserved Platonism by dehumanizing their deities. Gwyn has a lot in common with Zeus, the chief sky father in Plato's culture. Polytheistic sky fathers were replaced by the Christian God. Influenced by Plato, medieval Christian scholars determined that God was perfectly good. In the same way, Gwyn is associated with Plato's ideal of goodness by his association with the sun. The human-like pettiness and lusts of Zeus and the Greek pantheon were gone. Modern philosophers went on to transfer the jurisdiction of truth from God to a total abstraction, eliminating all human characteristics. This abstraction consists of a special relationship between what's in human minds and a separate reality. This relationship happens in any circumstance where every human mind will always form the same image. For example, the perception of time. Modernists retained Plato's duality, stated now as a distinction between mind and body, and they also retained Plato's criteria that truth must be eternal, although stated in different terms. They wanted justifications that no possible audience could ever disagree with. and like Plato's eternal form of the good, they wanted all truth to derive from the same set of consistent principles. Modern thinkers believed that this special correspondence is achieved in the empirical methods of the sciences that were emerging at that time. In the game, this is represented by Seath, who is associated with technology and experimentation. Seath is also a defective dragon, in that he is impermanent, unlike the everlasting dragons of the previous era, an era defined by a lack of any distinctions.
And with fire came disparity, heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark.
Distinction is necessary for language and abstract thought. The modern era held that science is a privileged representation of reality, free of the error that language is prone to in its ordinary usage. Language is in the shadows in Plato's cave. Seath's resemblance to the everlasting dragons is analogous to science's privileged relationship to the truth. His desire for eternal life is analogous to a modern thinker's desire for statements that can never be contested. Just as the modern viewpoint is a reformulation of Plato's philosophy, Seath's dukedom and his lord soul were granted to him by Gwyn, so his authority is derived from Gwyn's. His archives are also at the highest point on the map. He is literally ascendant. For these reasons, it's my interpretation that the social order of the game's setting symbolizes modern European culture. But Dark Souls uses these symbols to criticize modernity. The sun isn't real. A transcendent standpoint can't be achieved. That's why humanity isn't defined by a metaphor of luminosity. It's defined by a metaphor of darkness. People don't actually all perceive time in the same way. Nothing is experienced the same way by every person. The exact content of any particular experience depends on how all of our experiences, thoughts, and beliefs relate to that experience and relate to each other. As Gwyn's power fades, an absolute experience of time gives way to one that's interrelational.
We are amidst strange beings in a strange land. The flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. The very fabric wavers, and relations shift and obscure.
This indicates the failure of the modern worldview. The implication is that Gwyn, like a framework created in language, exists by virtue of the first flame. He wants it to burn forever, and therefore to exist forever, and to have authority forever. But the flame is temporary, the source of mere appearances, just like in Plato's analogy. The scientific theories of modernity were also temporary. All of them have since been revised, and they will continue to be revised. They thought they had seen Plato's sun, but they were only seeing the fire. Everyone's going hollow because Gwyn is trying to extend the flame. When we kindle, we strengthen the flame by giving up some of our humanity. The game visually communicates the loss of humanity as hollowing, a deterioration of the body, just like the deterioration of Gwyn's body. Rorty reaches the same conclusion as Dark Souls, that a transcendent standard of truth conflicts with being human.
In this depersonalized form, proper respect for a dehumanized father figure is shown not by obedience to him, but by an attempt to become identical with him. We do this by surrendering everything in us which separates us from him, such as space, time, and the body.
An earlier video by the Gemsbok does an excellent job of analyzing Dark Souls in terms of existentialism. I've included a link to it in the description. But existentialism, like many other responses to modernity, puts too much stress on the individual. Other responses put too much stress on social construct. The alternative model of truth promoted by Rorty, called Pragmatism, is a better fit for the overall themes in Dark Souls because of its emphasis on intersubjectivity. To understand why intersubjectivity is so important to Dark Souls, we have to consider that it was made in Japan. Modern philosophers are really just rationalizing their cultural preferences and class interests. By supposing that these were universal human obligations, they justified imposing their culture on the rest of the world. In the 19th century, this economic and cultural colonial enterprise began to destabilize Japanese society. Japan started deliberately adopting the elements of modernity it needed to compete technologically and industrially with its international rivals, especially the United States. Ever since, Japanese culture has been continuously recalculating the balance between modernity and its own traditions. This cultural crisis was intensified by the American occupation after World War II. U.S. forces directly controlled education and the media, with the aim of molding Japanese society to the demands of American foreign policy. One prominent figure in Japan's assimilation of modernity was the philosopher Watsuji Tetsuro, who lived during the first half of the 20th century. Watsuji's research into the history of Japanese culture and the etymology of Japanese words continues to influence how people think about pre-modern Japan today. Watsuji translated ideas from their mythical and religious contexts into the language of modern philosophy. Along the way, he discarded reverence for anything higher than humanity. He explained how these ideas form an enduring pattern in Japanese culture that's inscribed in the word for human being, ningen. The first character, which on its own is pronounced hito, refers to an individual human being, the focus of modern Western philosophy. The second character can be pronounced two ways, ma or aida, meaning either space or between. The same character appears in the word aidagara, which doesn't have an exact translation but has the sense of betweenness. This idea of betweenness is a big deal in the history of Japanese culture. Modernity sees things in terms of substance. Objects made of matter that exist independently of each other are primary. This is critical for the scientific method, which requires isolating events to make observations and measurements. The Japanese orientation, on the other hand, sees things in terms of process, how instead of what. Everything starts with insubstantial processes that overlap and depend on each other. There is no separate, independent existence, only the relationship of every process to every other process. Matter and objects are consequences. The Japanese language doesn't even require a subject to make a complete sentence. A verb can stand alone, without specifying or even implying who or what is doing the action. When a subject noun is used, it's as a modifier for the verb. Watsuji described human being as two such overlapping and interdependent processes. Between the individual in one sphere and the environment in the other, neither can be properly understood in isolation. Watsuji went as far as saying that the individual is impossible without an intersubjective context. You would be simply alone. One can only become a truly human individual by being out in the world, in the midst of culture and the environment. Just like how in Dark Souls, we acquire humanity by making progress into the level. These processes are not themselves primary in the Japanese perspective. They derive from a unity that comes before differentiation. So in contrast to modernity's separate body and mind, Japanese culture has a unified body-mind. The absence of differentiation makes this unity inexpressible, and so throughout history, the Japanese have talked about it in various terms like emptiness and nothingness. In Watsuji's ningen, the interaction between self and environment both arises from and resolves to a unified emptiness. Nothingness figures in modernity as what Rorty describes as an absolute and unbridgeable abyss between subject and object. We can encounter an image like this in Dark Souls, but if we equip the Covenant of Artorias ring, the abyss will instead look like the Japanese nothingness.
This ring symbolizes Knight Artorias' covenant with the beasts of the abyss. Its wearer, like Artorias himself, can traverse the abyss.
It's this covenant, a type of interrelation, that allows for existence in the nothingness of the abyss. Generally speaking, characters and locations don't stand in for people and things in Miyazaki's games. They stand in for ideas. Lord Dran doesn't have to work either the way modernity says the world works, or the way Japanese culture says the world works. Both of those can be in there as ideas. Japanese culture inherits from Buddhism the idea that all expressible truth is only appropriate for a certain audience at a certain time in a certain place. Exploring Darkroot Forest, defeating Sith and acquiring the ring changes the context, and so changes the meaning of the abyss. This is also important to Watsuji's concept of human being. The relationship between the two spheres is never fixed. There's a constant give and take between individuals and their social environment. From this, he developed an ethical system that requires change. He considered any activity that merely reinforces the status quo not only unethical, but inhuman. Consequently, ethical behavior is necessarily intersubjective and revisable, explicitly rejecting adherence to any transcendent principle. Rorty held a similar point of view.
Human beings should regulate their actions and beliefs by the need to join with other human beings in cooperative projects, rather than by the need to stand in the correct relation to something non-human.
Solaire's questline encapsulates all of these ideas. If we want to cooperate with him to change the inhuman status quo, we have to restore our humanity, and he has to give up his search for his own son, his own transcendent principle. Even if we never summon NPCs or other players, the game is still a collaborative effort. We find a lot of items on the corpses of other people who came before us and failed on the same mission. So many of the things we use, the armor, weapons, items, upgrades, souls, consumables, and most importantly the keys, are there because of someone else's contribution. Someone came before us and broke this window. Someone reduced the health of the second bell gargoyle. As I've encountered it, the discussion about what Dark Souls means revolves around the idea of creating purpose in a meaningless world. If I've been at all persuasive, I think anyone who sees this video will agree that it makes more sense to think about Dark Souls in terms of dismantling our sense of obligation to standards beyond humanity, and instead turning back toward humanity to join together and decide what collective future we should work toward. Dark Souls 2 sabotages this by fitting the dark ending into a cycle, like a natural law. Dark Souls 3 makes so many references to the first game, in part because it's restoring the meaning of the dark ending, but with different imagery in the usurpation of fire ending. Humanity's future is dark, not in the sense that it is evil, but in the sense that it's not intelligible in terms of a previously formulated theoretical context. It's dark because Dark Souls wants to redeem the ordinary, practical knowledge symbolized by the shadows from Plato's allegory. The uncertainty and potential for conflict in that are scary, but the security in sticking with the status quo is an illusion. Most likely, everyone watching this video has grown up immersed in perspectives dominated by modernism's correspondence theory of truth. So what I'm about to say will seem really counterintuitive, but there's problems with thinking this way. Math, science, logic, and even empiricism itself are all just tools. It would be foolish not to respect their power and the knowledge they generate, but they're the wrong tools for distinctly human questions about how we should live and who we should be. These methods of detached observation encourage us to see events as the inevitable outcomes of an immutable human nature, or the scientific laws of social practice, or the intrinsic nature of reality itself. Sometimes we need to know things in the way that Japanese tradition, Rorty's Pragmatism, and the gameplay of Dark Souls reckon that we can know things, through engagement. As a general trend, video games with a narrative focus imitate the language of cinema, with long cutscenes and dialogue trees and shot reverse shot. Our actions acquire significance through the stories we receive passively. Dark Souls and games like it invert this. The overall meaning doesn't depend on us finding the right clues to fill in all the gaps. It depends on us not doing this. The story is incomplete. It only has meaning by virtue of our agency. Life is the same way. The stagnation of the world's social order is putting our future in danger. Sometimes we're gonna get lost. There's not going to be a cutscene that tells us our objective and what it all means. We can't be spectators. We have to be agents and participants. We have to pick up where others left off, and if necessary, do things differently to succeed where they failed. We can be the Solaire who goes to the boss fog and puts his sign down. Let's not become the Solaire who stays behind to gaze at the sun.